Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock, and on behalf of the KYTC, Federal Highway Administration, and ACEC Kentucky, this is Brian Aldridge with Stantec welcoming you to the next session on the general planning track for the 2020 Virtual Partnering Conference. This is a session that I have been looking forward to personally for quite some time, because I'm actually sitting at my desk today for the first time in the office for about 3 months, actually looking at a 1983 copy of Project Planning Guidelines developed by the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, Department of Highways Division of Planning. So this has been a long time coming. There's been a lot of work put into it, and I think you're going to find a lot of useful information presented today and soon to follow. We've got three very esteemed presenters today. Steve DeWitt, the Strategic Planning Corridor Team Lead with the Division of Planning. Mike, the myth, the legend, Hancock, and Brad Johnson, the Division Manager for Transportation Planning and Traffic Engineering with HMB. With that, gents, I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and I will just add to everyone's information, as of all the other sessions, this one will be recorded, will be made available later for dissemination to your staffs. And we're also going to, as typical fashion, have a running Q&A, and we'll try to allow a little bit of time at the end to respond to those questions. So if you've got any questions, please add those into the Q&A window as we go along. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Brian. We're very excited to be able to present here this afternoon about the Planning Guidance Manual, something that, of course, has been a very long time coming. Very excited to have Mike and Brad alongside me, and we'll be hearing from them as we go along. I just wanted to start off by talking about why we're doing this, and a lot of it comes down to the most recent official action that has been taken with a planning guidance manual at the secretary's level occurred on the 19th of December, 1991. Don Kelly, who's I believe it's his birthday today, actually. Don Kelly signed the planning guidance manual into effect, and it has kind of sat like that for ever since. And so it was kind of time to update that. Now, if I want to take us back to 1991 and what everything was like back then, as you can see, I have regressed significantly in my time since then, but two other very dapper gentlemen making their appearance there. The guidance manual has not been updated in any material way officially since 1991. It is not currently available with all of the other policy manuals on the KYTC website, and it ceased to be applicable to the current structure of the cabinet and the current structure of the division. The division has taken on some other divisions, the old multimodal division, and it's gotten bigger, and it's been restructured a couple of times. And so there's just been a lot of changes, and a lot that needed to happen with it. We had gotten close a couple of times. 2006, 2011, 2015 were some attempts made to update it internally. But with KYTC's ongoing staffing issues, lots of priorities, the guidance manual would kind of get going, and then it would kind of get shifted to the back burner. At some point, I thought there was some kind of curse going on with the director of the division always leaving right when you tried to update the guidance manual, but not quite the case, even though it did happen this most recent time. we decided that 2019 was going to be different, that we were going to get the guidance manual done. And to do that, we decided to outsource the writing of the guidance manual to a consultant, utilizing the statewide planning contract that I oversee, and we had approval from FHWA to use SPR funds to update our guidance. As it so happened, HMB was next up in the rotation, and we thought that this worked out perfectly. At the time, of course, Mike worked at HMB. Brad has had a lot of experience with the Division of Planning, particularly with studies. Having Mike Hancock be able to write your guidance manual was very, very attractive to our division. And so our goals of updating the guidance manual was really to outline everything that the division is responsible for. And in a change that was made pretty late on, we were going to organize it by topic instead of by branch or by district office, for instance. And this would allow the guidance manual to show a cradle to grave process on things like official orders and roadway transfers and things that touch multiple branches, multiple districts. They go back and forth multiple times, but you could follow the journey from beginning to end, as opposed to only having a step of that process in one division and a step of the process in the district. We wanted to be able to differentiate and see between what we're doing and why. And is it because of just its KYTC policy? Is it because we've always done it that way? Or is there some law or regulation, CFR, KRS, behind what the division is doing? We also wanted it to be able to point to any required forms that you have to fill out. There are some official forms and some not so official forms that are used in the day-to-day workings of the division. And all in all, it was also to kind of show who is responsible for that effort. And that's what we went into the start of this guidance manual process with HMB as our goals. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brad to talk about the assignment and getting everything prepared.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Go ahead and jump to the next slide there. I'm going to talk a little bit about, so when Steve asked us to, Mike and I to kind of join him on this presentation, I went back and was just kind of reviewing the scoping materials that we had, just email correspondence. And one of the first things I kind of pulled up was our original scope of work, just to kind of give me some perspective of where this all began. And I was looking at the meeting minutes, and I think it's kind of worth noting. I mean, we had a kind of the typical bullet in the minutes that said, the meeting adjourned at approximately 10:30. That's usually the closing. Except then the next bullet immediately starts, well, later that day at approximately 3:15. I have no idea why I felt the need to note the time, but I did. Amanda Spencers, who was the director at the time, sent us an email noting that she had been talking to John Moore, and that, I quote, he recommended that we think about organizing the manual by topic instead of branch and district. And we can all kind of read between the lines there. When he says, think about it, that means do it. So that really kind of sent us on a little bit different direction than what we had just talked about earlier that morning. And that's, so as we really sit down and started thinking about where we go from there, we developed kind of our own just kind of purpose that came out of that discussion, but just kind of put that in words and then started to kind of formulate that approach. And with that purpose, we noted that we're going to develop a topical assessment, and it was meant to be both an internal guide for the Division of Planning, but then also, a reference manual for not only other divisions, but the public as well. So we wanted to, produce a document that anyone could understand, but that also gave, and we're going to go into more detail of how we got to this, but really gave the what, why, when, who. So that's one of the other documents that we kind of initially developed was, okay, well, what are these topics? And hop to the next slide. We kind of started just to formulate that and this was just a little Excel file that we started to throw together that just alphabetically listed the topics. And I know that's a little bit difficult to read, but this is really what kind of got us going, and we really started to just fill that in with those questions, and we're going to kind of show this completed. But this is just where we started. And in addition to this goes on for a couple pages. And then we also did a review of the 2015 stewardship agreement with FHWA and then the most recent planning work program, and just try to pull out as many different potential topics that we could find that may need to be addressed in this guidance manual. So that was kind of where we were able to start in that scoping process. And from there, it really just became we were looking for getting as much information as we could, conducting some interviews, which I'll talk about shortly. But Steve noted that we hadn't done an official guidance manual since '91, but there had been some attempts. And in some cases, some of the materials were further along than others. So, I mean, there was some potential sections and chapters, in a draft form so we got just this large data dump, and then as we went through the interview process, we got some more information, and it was just we just had to kind of sort through all that. And I'm just kind of, these are literally just little screenshots I took of our server, and just kind of the initial information grab, and then within each one of those folders was a number of documents as well. And the one from District 6 definitely was the biggest bulk of information. That's kind of what I'm showing there on the right. But so we had a lot of information that was provided, but we also went through and did an interview process. And this was really informative, particularly to me. As Steve mentioned, I've been working in planning for 20 years, but more on the study, doing the order studies, involved in statewide planning contracts, travel forecasting contract. So I honestly hadn't had the opportunity to touch every piece and part of the division. So there was user divisions that I just wasn't as familiar with, and it was great to be able to sit down with those individuals, and that's where we kind of started. We started with sitting down with each of the user divisions. And at that time, there wasn't a branch manager for customer service, so that was just Amanda kind of served that role. But then we also went out to the districts and met with a couple of the districts. We intentionally kind of picked a more urban district and a more rural district, so 6 and 10, and knew too that those districts would certainly be willing to share a lot of information as they did. We also made a trip down to District 2, and we kind of got a 2-for-1 deal there because we met with both Denitra and Nick. And Denitra had taken over the city EBRO, but had served previously in District 3 in the planning role. So we actually got to see the perspective of both hats that she's kind of worn at that point. So this was really informative. Mike and I took a ton of notes as we talked to the different folks. They provided a lot of follow-up materials, and that just kind of got added to the folders. That really just allowed us to feel like we had a lot of information, and you can actually go ahead and jump to that. But just to add to that a little bit, we did do a little bit of extra coordination. At the time, Eileen Vaughn was leading up kind of the shift process. So we wanted to give shift its due merit. So we met with her and trying to understand that. But at the same time respected the fact that shift could evolve a little over time. So, just you never know how that would evolve. So we wanted to just really understand that conceptually, but specifically as well. And then there was another, there's an engineering policy guide project that's taking place, and it is also topical based. And we thought there was a need to coordinate that effort. So we went over to Kentucky Transportation Cabinet and met with Kentucky Transportation Center, met with several of the folks over there, and then also Jared Stanley was involved in that effort. So we just tried to understand what they were doing and how they were approaching the topics. Now, understanding that they were taking a much deeper dive and we're looking at a little longer schedule, but we still wanted to understand how that was working and where we could coordinate. And even following that meeting, we invited Jared to each one of our project status meetings that we had for the guidance manual so that we could just maintain that coordination throughout. Jump to the next slide. So speaking of coordination, made the note there, how do you eat an elephant? Of course, one bite at a time. We had to just, we had all this information that we had gathered through interviews and information we've been provided. So we just developed a little workflow. And again, it's a little Excel spreadsheet. I understand you probably can't big enough to read on your screen, but we just took those, once we kind of settled in on the topics, we just went through and chunked them out and said, okay, we're going to try to deliver a section. In some cases, it was a topic. In some cases, it was multiple topics at a time. We're going to try to deliver those about every 3 weeks. And we're just going to continue to get a back and forth. So as Mike and I were working on a section, KYTC would be reviewing a section, and it just went back and they would provide comments, and we were able to just keep that going. I'd be lying if I said it followed exactly this schedule. That's why I wanted it so small so that you couldn't see the exact dates. But we did pretty decent to stick to the schedule that we committed to, and we're able to just provide a little material at a time, which I think just made that workflow all the better. And if you just kind of jump to my last slide here, this is just kind of a little diagram that I put together that does kind of summarize what we were able to do. And that is, as I was saying, you're just kind of submitting a topic, expecting at least the first draft to come back with comments. We would resolve those, send them back. If we got lucky, they would accept those. If we didn't, there would be another round, but that's okay. We just kind of kept that flow going. And then, once we got buy-off on a particular topic, we stuck it in the folder and noted it as complete. And then as we got closer to the end, we started to compile that into one complete document. And then we submitted that, did our own kind of internal reviews of that, knowing that at that point in time, a section may have been written 6 months prior. So you still wanted to kind of make sure it all flowed correctly and so forth. So we kind of gave it a read through as an entire document and not as pieces and parts. And then the cabinet did the same. And then, in essence, signed off on our piece of it. And then Steve's going to talk about towards the end, kind of where it goes from there. But that was kind of concluding our piece, and continue to be available and help out as needed, and track down some forms and clear copies of things and so forth. But now I'm going to turn it over to Mike and kind of let him give a little bit of a deeper dive into actually writing this document and just talk about some of the lessons learned and other items.
All right. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. And really, really excited to be here talking about absolutely the most exciting part of this presentation, and that's the actual writing of the manual. I debated long and hard about how do we make this really exciting, and frankly, I don't really know. We're going to give it our best shot here, and I hope you all can follow along with us and see kind of how we went through things. As a humble consultant, I was very happy, actually more than happy, to write about an area of the cabinet that I grew up in. Basically, an area of the cabinet that I still have immense respect for. And folks, for me, this was, it was not something I ran from. When Steve asked us to do this, I embraced it because to me, it's a labor of love. I really enjoyed the opportunity to get into and to dissect and describe an area of the transportation cabinet that is near and dear to my heart. So with that, I'll jump back to where Brad was a moment ago when he talked about guiding principles. And you see over on the right side of the screen there, I have this. That's an actual photo of a whiteboard. And that was Amanda Spencer's whiteboard. I don't know if she did all of the writing there or if someone else did, but basically it was the note taking surrounding what we were expected to do with this guidance manual. And in that there were some key points. She did talk about initial interviews. She talked about a document review. She talked about an annotated outline by February 15th of last year. She talked about a first draft in October of last year. And then she talked about publishing the document, or at least getting it to the publishing process by around November of last year. And as Brad says, we may not have hit those dates exactly, but that was our challenge right out of the bat is we want to get it done. We want this to be done. As Steve said earlier, there have been multiple attempts to do it in the past. Those had not been accomplished for one reason or another. So the idea was to give it to us and have us work it into our workflow and knock it out. And so we did our level best. This document was to be end user oriented. As Brad mentioned, it's both an internal guide for people who work in the Division of Planning, but it's also a reference manual. If you had a planning issue that you were trying to do some research on or figure out, this was a place you could go and learn about that specific issue. Amanda asked that it be topics based after a conversation with John, and I think there's a lot of good reasons for why that was important. Not the least of which is the thing that Brad mentioned about the Transportation Center doing their own attempt to develop knowledge articles from across the cabinet. So making our guidance manual topics based really kind of fit that flow better and gave the opportunity for us in some respects to be on the bleeding edge of figuring out what a topics based manual was going to look like. So lots of workflow diagrams was something else that we had been requested to do. And so we did our best to develop those one by one and incorporate those in some of the more difficult areas to help people, frankly, understand what was going on within the planning function. And then we had links to state and federal law. The planning process is steeped in state and federal law. I mean, the vast majority of what happens there is required to happen. It's not just something that someone has decided to do. It's actually required to happen. So, Steve, with that, the next slide, please. So as we got into it and began the background research, a lot of places to look for information. The one thing you cannot say about the planning process is that there's no information to go delve through. The planning process has more information than virtually anything else going, and it's largely because people have been looking for years at how do you translate public opinion into actual programs that make sense. And many of you remember our circle diagrams and other things where we talk about planning, informing design that leads to construction, that then leads roads to being maintained, where where planning completes that loop by assessing the needs again and repeating the process. So as we begin to look at things like the planning work program, the planning website itself, which I excerpted a little piece from there to the right. I mean, the planning website itself is an incredible source of information. We had various planning documents that we also looked at and digested. We also used the KYTC Data Mart extensively and used that to bring other information into view. The interviews were extraordinary. We had tremendous time doing that, not only with Jason, Denitra, Carol, and others, Nikki, so many folks at the district level, but also internally in the Division of Planning. And Ron Wilhoit's probably still not speaking to me. I don't know. We with Amanda, I'll share another story in just a moment about why Ron was so critical. But then we, through that list of interviews, we developed our relevant topics and subtopics, and we did develop that annotated outline as requested, and used that then to depart into the actual preparation of the document. So Steve, yeah. So what we did, we from the previous effort to put together those topics and subtopics, we developed the table of contents. Brad showed you an early version of that a few minutes ago. One of the things that became critically important to us was a question and answer format as we began to get into all of the processes and pieces and parts that the planning guidance manual was expected to cover. It became very apparent that we needed to bring focus to what we were talking about, and we elected to do that by basically asking 4 questions. What is done in the planning function, this particular piece of it? Why is it being done? When is it done? What schedule, what time frame is involved? And who does it? What function, what part of the Division of Planning is actually responsible for doing this? And I hope you can look at those and see them at a glance that if you're coming in from the outside looking at a planning guidance manual, now you can simply drill down into the particular thing you're looking at and not only see what's done and why it's done, when it's done, but you can see who you can contact. When I say who, it's the different section or branch that's responsible for that. But it takes you all the way down to the point of being able to pick up the phone and call someone if you have a more specific question. You'll notice that we didn't define the how of the planning process. And the reason we didn't do that was very simple. Everyone you talk to, even though they may have the same type of requirement, seem to have a different approach as to how they went at it. And the approach usually just differed slightly, but still trying to come up with a how something's done that fit every conceivable way you could do that particular planning function was very, very difficult. So we left that to future generations of this manual, or maybe a deeper dive into some of these topics to figure out the best way to actually do some of these things. So basically our purpose was to present the information in a coherent fashion, and I think we did that. So Steve, next slide. One of the things that as we were going through all of those topics and subtopics and all of the who, what, when, where, and why, as we were going through that, it became evident very quickly that there was an idea that had been floated about a planning activity matrix. And so we decided to compile that planning activity matrix as we built the manual itself to basically be a shorthand version of the planning guidance manual. If you didn't want to take the time to drill down into a topic through the written information, you could actually go to this planning activity matrix and learn something about any topic that you had simply by looking at the activity matrix. This particular chart shows air quality, for instance. That's the planning topic. You have some subtopics there. Then you see what is being done, why is it done, when is it done, and who does it. And of course, the modal programs area of planning is the who in that case. but you can see at a glance, you learn a lot about the planning function just in those sets of sheets. So, okay, we had our topics list. We had all of these variety of pieces and parts that we wanted to bring together in the form of a coherent manual. So where to start? This is where Ron Wilhoit comes in. Amanda said early on in this process, she said, I want you to start with the official order process as it pertains to planning. She said, no one understands why we do that and how it actually works. And she said, for me, would you please do the official order process first? Well, as you can imagine, it turned out to be one of the most difficult areas that we got into. There's a reason why no one quite understood it. If you see the diagram to the right there, that's a very simple diagram that describes what it takes to close or abandon a road in the state of Kentucky, a state-owned highway. And so you can see it's a very detailed process, intricate little process that involves the division of right-of-way and the finance cabinet as that whole process winds up. So I mean, there for each of the individual components of the planning guidance manual, we worked hard to accompany the narrative that was developed with workflow diagrams that could be followed to hopefully bring a little bit more of a picture to the narrative and help the understanding of the reader. At least that was our goal. Throughout the planning guidance manual, we embedded links. We talked about how to link the reader more directly with some of the state and federal laws that pertain to planning. And so we were able to do that. And I believe the final document in e-version, you're gonna have that ability for numerous items. So I do think that's going to work very well. And then the additional materials that we developed, we attached some things, we appended some things just to help with certain activities that perhaps suggested that you needed an agreement between the state and the county or some other entity. And we attached some copies of some of those types of agreements to help the reader appreciate the depth to which these things had to go. So with that, Steve, the final thing I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about, and folks, I want you all to know how much it pains me not to be able to get down into the nitty gritty and the detail, the granular level of how we actually wrote this document. I mean, it's just gnawing at my soul not being able to do that. But I did want to hit it at a very high level here and talk about the lessons that we learned through this process. The number one thing you have to do anytime you're writing any kind of manual like this is understand the reasons for the processes. I mean, I just left a presentation on the US 60 bridge down at Smithland, and we were talking about the geotech issues. Why in the world is geotech so important? It's because you're building, that's your foundation on which you're going to build the rest of your argument, your bridge in that case. And so you had to understand the reasons for the processes. We used the question and answer approach to sort that out and to sort of tease out the issues. So I'm very happy with the way that worked. The next thing you have to do is make sure you listen to the practitioners. I'm picking on Ron Wilhoit a little bit here, but Ron was so patient with me to be on the phone with him and to lead me through the various steps of the various processes that an official order might include. Ron he had the patience of Job and was just an incredibly great individual to work with there. But again, it took listening to him, picking his brain, if you will, and putting that into a manual where you could actually see the reasons why and the activities behind what Ron was doing. We tried to use pictures in here, and basically in a manual, you're talking flow charts, but those flow charts do help the understanding of the reader, and we were very excited about that as well. Also, we through the planning activity matrix, we developed a one-stop shop for planning. I think if you go into the guidance manual when it's made available and you're able to go to that activity matrix and see the overall picture of what the Division of Planning is responsible for, and recognize that in very short order, you can appreciate and understand some particular aspect of planning that you may have an interest in. You'll understand the one-stop shop sort of classification of that. I think that activity matrix is going to be worth its weight in gold when it's done. And then the last thing I would share is a lesson learned. We heard Amanda. We heard her early on in the process when she simply said, get it done. And so we worked hard. Brad mentioned we may not have met every deadline perfectly, but we worked hard to get it done, and I believe we did. And I think the final product is going to prove worth all the efforts we put into it. So with that, Steve, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Brad, for all of your hard work on this. And getting it done is exactly what you did. And then it just turns back to the cabinet to actually put it all together. And let's talk now about the output of all of that work and getting it from it being written by HMB and getting it into a guidance manual that is a actual policy document of the cabinet and what happens there. As you can see, this is the cover page of the guidance manual with month 2020. As you notice, it's not on the website yet, but it only needs like one more signature, and so hopefully by the end of the week, it will be out and available. So just getting that out of the way first. Brad Webb and Kim Jasper from OHRM were tremendously helpful throughout this entire process. We invited them to the early meetings that we had when we started talking to HMB and talking about what this manual needed to look like. And they kind of stepped back at that point. It was like, just get everything that you want together and then send it to us and we'll take care of the rest. And so this is not something that typically happens when dealing with my planning consultants. We don't usually ask them to just, get all of the data and we'll format it. No, we need a final product from you. But this was different. This was going to be completed by OHRM, and they are the experts with getting it into the proper format and making sure it all sounds the same in voice, tone, and organization, things that I do not know anything about and cannot edit into any document. Active voice, passive voice, no idea. And so that process took a little bit of time. Every chapter was a dialogue between myself and Kim where she, made some edits, and I changed anything back to that wasn't quite right, and there was red text and blue text. It was a process, but it's what we needed to do to get it to completion. One thing I want to point out, planning didn't really have a logo at this point, and there's a nice little spot for the logo on every chapter heading and every guidance manual. And so we engaged the print shop downstairs and their graphic design team to create a logo for the Division of Planning. We've used the print shop before. They designed the data-driven safety analysis logo that was the cornerstone of partnering last year. And I just want to keep putting it out there that those tools are free to use for members of the cabinet, and they only require a charge code just for record keeping, but all of their services are not taken out of a project budget or a chapter budget in our case. So we've got a great logo that I think encapsulates what planning does. We kind of a couple times, but really it's that forward-looking and backward-looking component of what planning does. I want to talk about some cool things that are in the document and show off all of everyone's hard work. The Q&A format that Mike was talking about and that activity matrix have really changed the game of guidance manuals. It is going to be the preferred layout of what OHRM wants to see in manuals going forward. It's very straightforward and easy to follow. The flow charts simplify everything, and the activity matrix is just that one look of what you would need if you have a quick question, need to look up what the CFR is. And then the topic organization really helps you de-silo all of these staff and all of these workflows. And so it's really, really important. And you've got to give credit to Mike and Brad for really stepping up and making this unique and kind of going out on a limb to kind of change how all of this is done. Some other cool things, we heard a lot from the districts that there are a lot of district responsibilities that aren't necessarily written down or very clear or vary district to district. In multiple districts, the district planner is also the LPA coordinator, the HSIP coordinator, SM4 and COHAL. And we didn't want to kind of explain every facet of the district planner's job, but be able to point them in the direction that they needed to go to if they have rural municipal aid questions, if there's a form they need from Division of Construction, just be able to try and make those tasks a little bit easier, particularly for a new planner coming in. I think the Division of Planning is probably the worst in the cabinet for acronyms and needing a glossary. We have an acronym for everything, sometimes multiple times. And so the guidance manual includes 6 pages of acronyms where you're just spelling out the acronym. That's all it is. And there's 6 pages of that, as well as 16 pages of glossary. Kind of just, a quick look at some important legislation, diving into other acronyms, things like that. In the appendix, we also have some example agreements that tend to come up a lot, like the maintenance co-op agreements, local resolutions that city councils need to pass regarding property transfer, and samples of those. So it's really easy for staff to be able to pick up and run with. And I want to say, one last thing. So the manual, when it goes out, I'm going to send it to all the districts and everything, and as well as the planners I work with on a day-to-day basis. But it will be able to be found on the transportation website. And I expect that there's probably some things that aren't exactly correct. And instead of going through a process where we wanted it to be perfect, and that end up taking another couple of years and it just get pushed down the road again, we're not letting perfect be the enemy of good. And so we're going to get a planning manual out there in the world, and then everyone will send emails to me saying what's wrong with it. I'm going to put them in a list, and then next year we'll do an errata and incorporate edits and continue to make it better. And so that's kind of the plan going forward from that. I'm happy to take any questions. If there's a section of this that you would like to take a look at it, I've got it pulled up on PDF. I can switch screens for Saeed. Yes, I will also send it to the MPOs and all the ads as well. And there's lots of information in there about how the cabinet interacts with MPOs and the ads and all of that information as well. So happy to take any questions, any comments. I wish it was up on the website for me to show you, but we'll forge a couple signatures and we'll get it out.
Gentlemen, that was an excellent and informative presentation. And as a practitioner, I particularly appreciate the fact that you spelled out the who, what, when, and why, and you've left the how up to interpretation. So I kudos on all the hard work of the entire team that went into this effort, and I look forward to personally seeing a complete copy of the planning manual. I also personally miss seeing some of those Amanda Spencer whiteboards. And scroll through my telephone, and I can assure you I've got several similar photos. So that meant to see that photo in the presentation. I don't see any questions that have been asked. Steve, you mentioned as far as schedule, we might see it as soon as the end of the week, but more likely or the end of the month at least. Is that correct?
It'll come out when it comes out. It's on a rush right now, but it's done. It's compiled. It just needs a signature and to replace that highlighted text with the new date, and it'll be out.
Awesome. Any other questions from anyone? Well, once again, I appreciate your time and your attendance this afternoon. This was a well-attended session. We had over 100 people signed in at one point. So again, a timely and important topic that's going to be great use to all of us moving forward. So I saw just following through the chat that we've got practitioners all around the state that are looking forward to seeing this document come to fruition. So again, kudos to the entire team. going back to Amanda Spencer and John Moore for the foresight to get this done. So once again, this session will be recorded. So if anyone is interested in viewing it later or providing it to their staff, that will be available. So great afternoon, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you soon, hopefully in person. Take care.
Great.
Thank you all.
See you, everyone.